Colonization really is at the root of so many systemic barriers to healthcare, to the roots of health inequities that trans people face, as well as the specific forms of discrimination that trans two-spirit people experience when trying to access healthcare, but also when trying to access basic necessities of housing, transportation, education, so many other kind of quality of life issues.
I think it's important to acknowledge that as two-spirit people, we have been the target of a genocide within a genocide, that for 500 years our Indigenous nations have been under attack, and that the Canadian government and governmental forces before sought to eliminate us, but within the attempts to annihilate our nations was a very targeted attempt to, destroy two-spirit people and trans people. That's, in some nations there were 16 notions of gender, so I try to be respectful of all those different expressions of who we are. But it's important to recognize that there was a power there that was intimidating to the settler state.
Through the Indian Act, the idea of Indians was established as a way of forming kind of racialized set of rights or racialized set of peoples through the Indian Act, which was also gendered. So rights in the Indian Act were determined through men and women differently, and there was no recognition of anyone who wasn't men or women. And then at the same time, residential schools were imposed that were a way of simultaneously racializing and gendering Indigenous children. I think importantly to understand at the level of our bodies. So to think about the ways that the Indian Act legislated race and gender regimes through law and through status, that residential schools imposed race and gender through children's embodiment of ideas of what it was to be an Indian and to be a boy or a girl. And to know that residential schools were purposefully designed to break down the passing of Indigenous cultural practice and teaching. So Indigenous languages, Indigenous cultural ceremony, identity, names.
Our parents didn't know how to be parents because my parents were residential school survivors. My grandparents were residential school survivors. So there's 3 generations of residential school survivors. So, the government really had a very strict agenda of what they want, what they intended across the country, and they were very successful. There are many elders in my community that are still devout Catholics.
A lot of my people are Concord Catholic, and they do not participate in culture, and a lot of our culture is dying because a lot of those folks were taught in residential school that who they are and what they are and where they come from and their culture is bad and it's evil and wicked, and that they could not participate in that anymore. So a lot of stories and a lot of culture is lost.
There's a lot of negatives that were associated with colonization of Indigenous folks and Black folks and their combined histories and the extent of those histories and the knowledge that were passed and the teachings that were passed. And so in a way, in my particular case, pretty much all of that is lost.
For as far as language goes, our people, and in general, were forced to forget it. It was not safe, especially for young, two-spirited or transgender folks. Like when going into the schools, it was dangerous, and community was erased. So it's something that elders also held, the ones that remember that there was sacredness to it. There's a little bit of taboo that goes with that, that it's like, why do you want to know that? Why do you want to hear that? And that can even come into when our youth now are going in and saying, what is our history? Some folks have it, and some folks it's been colored by colonization. It's been really tainted in that way. And so I think when language is a part of that, like our access to that language, it's realizing that there are words and there's many, many ways of being and how we can express that.
Well, my first day in Indian day school, the grade 1 teacher asked me to count 1 to 10, so I was very proud of the languages that I had learned to speak. So I spoke in English, Squamish, Musqueam, Spanish, Italian, German. And I was dragged down the hall by my teacher, and the principal and 3 other nuns whipped my hands for a number of hours with a leather strap. I was told not to speak another language other than what was spoken to me. And then the following week, the teacher and Mother Michaela, the principal and Mother Michaela, Sister Joseph Michael and Mother Michaela, dragged me to the basement, and they opened the furnace and they stuck my head in a furnace and they burned all my hair off. They said I was going to burn in hell because I spoke other languages. So I was 5 years old, so I really didn't understand why these people were doing this to me.
I remember growing up and it's either blue or pink, you know, boy or girl. Like, if you're a girl, you don't wear blue, you know, if you're a boy, you don't wear pink. And that's totally a conformity that colonization has brought and down on our people. And it's had its effects, and I see it still to this day.
Even within the TRC, you know, trans and two-spirit people aren't mentioned at all. In the TRC calls to action, there's only one for gender, and it's to hold a national inquiry into missing and murdered women. So I do think that it not only shows well, for me, the gap in the TRC really shows the extent of erasure of gender diversity and the fact that Indigenous kind of politics in Canada and our understanding of colonization is still very, very lacking in understanding that the gender binary is a construction and that it had something to do with residential schools. So I think we need to really keep pushing that conversation within Indigenous communities, within our politics and our governance, but also, of course, within healthcare and in thinking about where kind of transphobia originates in Canada.